Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. This is your host, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And where we also believe that the story that you tell your own self about your own life, that is the most important story that you will ever tell. I'm excited to jump into, the science behind this whole idea and how our reality is altered in the future. If you're just joining us for the first time, we're in the second season of the Mindset Check podcast. In the first season, we told a really big story when I read to you from my journal from when I was 15 and pregnant. And now we are in a completely different side of the story. Pay attention to that, where we're hearing something different. And we're hearing the side of the story from my current husband, who I've been married to for 24 years, and how our stories ended up coming together after such a huge and heavy story. It's so fun. And of course, you know that the story is really just there to give us access to talk about life, right? Like all of the things in life and things that come up and things that we can think about more clearly so that we have more power in our living, right? You have more power than you think you do. So that's what the podcast is about. I'm thrilled that you're here and joining us today. Let's jump in.
December 23rd, 1995. AP English, Advanced Placement English. Not a good match for someone that doesn't understand what they read, doesn't remember what they read, and certainly doesn't like to read. Oh, and all the rules of the English language. So many rules. This class is going to be the death of me. How did I let my mom convince me to take at least one hard class my senior year? If there's anything good about AP English, it would have to be this. Free verse poetry. No rhyming, no pattern, no form, leeway to write whatever I want to write and to call it a poem. Now we're talking. So that was our assignment this past week. Turned it in yesterday. I hope it's only my teacher that sees it. Sometimes we have to read out loud our writing assignments. Please don't make me read this in class. So what could I possibly write about? You guessed it. It's now been a week. That night of the dance, well, the entire day actually, was the best day of my life. I would expect nothing less when it's an entire day with her. My highlights. So much time together. My dad letting me drive the Lexus SC400. Group plans changing last minute and just the two of us at lunch instead of a big crowd. Skating backwards again, just like good old times. Her thigh grabs above the knee. Of course, those are worth mentioning again. Picking her up, but seeing her squeal through the front door glass and scurry away to make a grand entrance. That first look at Misha. Red dress, white gloves, back exposed. Mind-blowing gorgeous. Proudly parading her around the dance. Lots of puzzled lookers. Their expression said it all. Who is that girl? Slow dancing, and maybe a bit more. To Lady in Red. I mean, come on. Did the dance gods write the script or what? Yes, it really happened like that. Embracing me from behind while watching a movie at Mike Harden's. Feeling wanted, feeling loved, feeling like I was in a dreamland. So much more I could say. Well, here is my first stab at a free verse poem, fittingly called That Night. I'll let it do some of the talking. That night. Sometimes a day can be so perfect it becomes one to remember forever. It's a day that starts out by the look of happiness on her face. It's a day where the happiness you feel is greater than no other. It's a day that you know should never have to end. It's a day that eventually turns into a night. It's a night that your smile can't leave your face. It's a night that you can't believe the one you are with can possibly look that good. A night where people stare in wonder of who she could be. A night that can embarrass you because your looks may not quite match hers. It's a night where a dance has never meant that much to you, where it seems it was only meant for those two. It's a dance where your lips finally meet for the first time. It's a night where the only other wish you could have would be to have time stand still. But as the songs go by, so does the time. It's a night where you find yourself checking your watch to sadly find out that only one more song exists. It's a night where the tears almost enter your eyes as you wonder if it could all be so real. It's a night that you'll always wonder about to think if it could happen again. It's a night that is sealed with another kiss. It's a night where you can honestly admit you've had no greater time. And it's a night where you wonder if she only felt the same as you. Thank you, Misha. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for the unmatched energy, the smiles, the beauty, the touches, the hugs, the kisses, the joy. It's now been a few weeks since you've been back in my life after these many years. I never could have imagined that you asking me to call you a few months ago while sitting at April's game would have us where we are today. Merry Christmas in 2 days.
One of Jake's greatest strengths, then and even until this day, is the way that he praises me. It really is amazing. He compliments me every day. He has a way of looking at me and seeing complete beauty. And there was a time in my life where, I don't know if you know the Johnny Lingo story, but it's a story about a man who buys this wife. Back in the culture of these times, the custom was to be able to essentially purchase a wife with cows. And 10 cows was like the max. It was like, holy cow. That's funny, holy cow. It was like no one had ever really paid 10 cows except for a few times. And Johnny Lingo comes along and pays her dad 10 cows to be able to marry this woman, Mahana, you ugly. And he tells her how beautiful she is, and he buys her a mirror so she can see herself. This was like island life, right? And he was a merchant, and so he sailed to different islands to sell things. And the family hadn't seen them for a very long time, and they came back to the island, and Mohana was absolutely beautiful and breathtaking to the point that people didn't recognize her. I love this story so much because it tells the power of the words that we hang on to, that we believe, the power of the words that people say around us, that we allow to sink into our mind, and how it actually truly affects us. And this has been one of Jake's greatest strengths. And there was a period of time in my life where I was like, wow, wow, I've gotten more beautiful. This was like, after my second child probably. And I truly felt like that. And I truly felt like it was attributed to how much Jake praised me. I can't, we could stop the podcast right there. That's enough. You have more power than you think you do. Done. Boom. The words that we allow to seep into our mind, that are on repetition for us, that we believe, that's what becomes our life. You might remember a while back in the episode, I shared about Uncle Trent and Aunt Donna. And at this point in the story, even though we didn't talk about Chase in this episode, these are Chase's parents. And at Uncle Trent's funeral, Aunt Donna said, "Let me tell you what it was like to be his wife." Another something that's in my brain is we watched a movie recently that Celine Dion was in, and she was talking to a guy about, has he ever been in love? And she said, has anyone ever done things that made you feel so much passion? And then she said, have you ever done things that have made another person feel so much passion, so much love? It's incredible, the reality that we create. It's incredible. As for me, in this situation, in this dance date, I look back and see, a young girl who skipped out on a lot of things that young girls do. And it was an amazing moment in time where I felt like a teenager, where I got to live some of the memories and the dreams that I thought had long surpassed me. And it was really the only dance I ever went to. And to be so dreamy, right? Like the red dress. Remember, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this dance. And I borrowed this red dress from a friend that fit like a glove. It was perfect. And I had these white gloves and white pumps because that was the style back then. And, you know, we exchanged our corsage and our boutonniere and took pictures that, you know, tell a story of 1,000 words. I posted a little reel on Instagram because a year ago we were invited to a throwback prom. And the throwback prom was like, you know, an adult prom. Like we're going to do a redo of prom night and bring your, you know, spouse and it'll be a fun time. Well, I was planning on wearing a green dress, and my son's girlfriend at the time said to me, Mish, but what did you wear when you were in high school? And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this was almost lost on me. So I bought a red dress and I surprised Jake. And when I came out and I was all dressed, I was holding his original old sports coat. And I said, honey, would you rather wear this instead? From what he was wearing, he had no idea. It was so fun. And then they named us Prom King and Queen. So I put together a little reel on Instagram last year. You might have seen it. If you haven't, then I will put a link to it in the show notes. And you can watch, you know, there's a few pictures of me being pregnant with Taylor and a few that just kind of show that story. And then show a few pictures of Jake and I this day that we're talking about, the day date, and also leading into the evening, and all of those pictures that we took, the memories that were created. And then fast forward 26 years and we're invited to a throwback prom and we get a redo of this amazing night. And we are also named Prom King and Queen. It was really fun. The best part to note from that Instagram reel is the last line. You know, when I illustrated, yes, I was a pregnant teenager. I lost my little girl, went through all of this business. And then guess what? 26 years later, I found this incredible guy. We've had this amazing relationship. It doesn't say all this in the reel. But essentially the last line says your story is never over. And that is such a valid statement. It is so true. Your story truly never really is over. You know, I feel like, and I hope that that is part of the biggest message that you get when you come here every single week and you tune in with me and we talk about how much power that you have to alter, influence, and change your life for the better. And I get asked this a lot. I get asked, you know, how is it that, you know, this turned out this way for you? How did you get to where you are when that's where you were? A lot of people like understanding that because I think it gives them hope in their own story, right? Because no matter what you go through, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you are left with after the experiences of life, you're still you. You're still you, and you have every power inside of you to alter what the truth is that you're experiencing as reality. We learn, we grow. There's something that expands inside of you. It's a gift that you're given when you go through tough things. But ultimately, I think that when we're in tender spots, I think that when we're in tender situations, I think there are so many different directions our life can go. And I think that's why people ask. It's because they want to know what it was that was influential in my life to help lead me to where I am. And I think it's the story. I think it's the story that I attached to, that, you know, we've talked a lot about how influential my family, especially my dad, was in rewriting what my story was. Because if you really, really look at my life, you could say, at that time, I could have believed that I was kind of a sellout, that I was a washed up, like good for nothing, whatever you want to put in that we tend to believe about ourselves, because our brain is a little liar. And for whatever reason, we can fall into ruminating and making bad calls on the truth of the situation. And my dad made sure that I heard a different story. Get this, he was an editor. So if you write a story and you have an editor and you take your story to an editor and they say, actually, let's tell it from this angle, or let's shift this, or let's shift that. And so today I want to talk about how editing our story, because there's lots of truths we can tell. We've talked about that. But the editing of the story is what helps us to be able to attach to something different. I want to share with you science, because I love science, around how our thoughts actually program our cells, the cells in our body, every single cell that's in our body. So here's a quote from an article called How Your Thoughts Program Your Cells. There are thousands upon thousands of receptors on each cell in our body. Each receptor is specific to one peptide or protein. When we have feelings of anger, sadness, guilt, excitement, happiness, or nervousness, each separate emotion releases its own flurry of neuropeptides. Those peptides surge through the body and connect with those receptors, which change the structure of each cell as a whole. Where this gets interesting is when the cells actually divide. If a cell has been exposed to a certain peptide more than others, don't worry, stay with me, I'm going to explain all of this. The new cell that is produced through its division will have more of the receptor that matches with that specific peptide. Likewise, the cell will also have less receptors for peptides that its mother or sister cell was not exposed to as often. Okay, that probably sounds like a lot of, what did you just say? So I want to break this down for you. Each thought produces peptides. Okay, so you are then feeling with what peptides you produce. And when you're doing that, you're actually programming your cells. And when your cells divide, they divide as the cell that they've been programmed to be. So if you have programmed your cells towards negativity, and those cells split, it only makes that feeling more alive and alive and alive in your body. Does that make sense? It's another way of explaining how we can become addicted to negative feelings, because we are actually programming ourselves with the feelings that we feel. The good news is that every single cell in your body is replaced every 2 months. So you can reprogram your cells. Okay? You can reprogram them to having more optimistic thoughts by adopting positive thinking practices. Okay, like when we say choosing your feelings and how important it is to drop into doing things that help you feel gratitude, feel happiness, to laugh, to watch something funny, to call someone who makes you laugh or feel good, those are literal game changers. Because if you do that for long enough, you reprogram your cells, right? Every single cell is replaced every 2 months. So if a certain cell has programming towards negative thinking, and you start thinking positively, then it will be replaced. I love finding science that says you don't have to be defined by something that's happening in your life. You don't have to be defined by your past, right? Your biology or your genetic makeup does not spell what your destiny will be. You have a choice in determining your future. You have so much power than we have ever even really scientifically had proof for ever before in these days we're living in right now that help us to know how much power we really have to influence our physical and our mental realities. Our mindset is recognized by our body, even on a genetic level. When we improve our mental habits, the more of a beneficial response you actually do get from your body. Here's another quote by Lynn McTaggart. She says that research has been done for more than 30 years in institutions around the world, showing that thoughts are capable of affecting everything from the simplest machines to the most complex living beings. This evidence suggests that human thoughts and intentions are an actual physical something with astonishing power to change our world. Every thought we have is tangible energy with the power to transform. A thought is not only a thing, a thought is a thing that influences other things. So I could buy into the idea that I was, washed up, that I had made decisions I could never recover from in my life. Or I could listen to the sweet words of the incredible people around me that I gave high credence towards, and I believed the story that they told me. There's a story of the value of money, and there was a teacher who held up $100 bill in front of her students, and she said, "Put your hands up if you want this money." And every single hand in the room goes up, to which the teacher says, "I'm going to give this money to someone here, but first let me do this." And she crumples up the bill up in her hands, and then she said, "Who still wants it?" And the hands stay up, and the teacher then drops the bill on the floor, stomps and grinds it into the ground, and picks it back up. And she says, "How about now?" And the hands stay up. She covers it with mud, asks who still wants it. She says, "Class, I hope you see the lesson here. It didn't matter what I did to this money. You still wanted it because the value stayed the same. Even with its creases and dirtiness, it's still worth $100. She said it's the same with us. There will be similar times in your life when you're dropped, bruised, and muddied. Yet no matter what happens, you never lose your value. It's funny the stories that we tell ourselves, that we're not good enough anymore, we're getting older, or we just can't quite measure up to people who know more than us, or whatever the story is. And guess what? Your cells are listening. They are creating the very makeup of your body. And what you believe becomes. What you focus on grows. Remember the story of the kids who had like 100 keys on a key ring? This is a real experiment that they did. And they said, find the key to this door. And they couldn't find it. And then they put superhero capes on them. And the moment that they did that, they found it within 5 tries. Because they believed in themselves. They thought something different. They dared to believe a truth. So what is the truth that you are going to commit to believe about yourself? Where do you owe it to yourself to tell a different story? Because your story is the most important story that you'll tell. There was a picture that I recently saw of a person just standing in a field, and there was gel bars in front of them, and they're holding on to these bars like they're in a jail cell. But the bars are not even attached to any walls or buildings. The person could easily just walk outside of the bars and be free. And so many times, the stories we are telling ourselves have us behind bars, where there is freedom all around us, but we choose to stand behind them. The story we tell allows us to step into a different reality. The edit that we choose to believe. Isn't it interesting that when you meet someone for the first time, or somebody says, "Hey, how's it going?" Maybe that's when you realize how much of a choice you have in what you actually say, in what comes out of your mouth. Because we offer narratives that condition how the person should treat us. Maybe we tell them, we're doing so great in business, our family's amazing. We change the story. We have enough power when we meet someone to do that. We edit what we choose. But when we walk away from circumstances like that and we tell ourselves something different, when we put ourselves behind those bars that there's truly really freedom all around, that's when we're trapping our own selves. And we get conditioned. I know we get conditioned. There's a story called Shark Bait, and there was a marine biologist that was involved with an experiment with a shark, and he placed a shark in a tank along with other small bait fishes, and as expected, the shark ate every single fish. And then the marine biologist inserted a clear fiberglass to create two sections within the tank, and he placed the shark in one area and the smaller fish in the other. The shark quickly attacked, but then bounced off the fiberglass. The shark kept on repeating this behavior. It just wouldn't stop trying. When the small fish in the other section remained unharmed and carefree, after about an hour, the shark finally gave up. This experiment was repeated several dozen times over the next few weeks. Each time, the shark got less aggressive. Eventually, the shark got tired and simply stopped attacking altogether. The marine biologist removed the fiberglass. The shark, however, didn't attack. Instead, it was trained to believe in the existence of a barrier between it and the bait fish. So sometimes we experience something so fierce in our life, so many setbacks or failures, and we give up and we start to believe the story that says we can't, or it won't happen, or whatever it is about what happened to us in the past. But the only real barrier between where we are and where we want to go is in our mind. It's in our thoughts. There's a quote that my son told me about the other day. I don't even know who said it, but it says, "Do not mistake incompetence for malice." Think about that. When we mistake it for malice, we say they're out to get us, they're trying to hurt us, and really they're just not capable of doing whatever we thought that they should have done. And then we create this whole story around it. I like to think of life in the way of taking replacements, right? Maybe giving people the benefit of the doubt in that circumstance, or replacements in the way of like shifting from judgment to compassion. And when we can shift and make proper and good replacements, we become miracle workers. Replacing have to with get to, right? Like I get to go to work instead of I have to go to work. Or I get to work out versus I have to work out. Or I get to cook dinner. Making replacements and figuring out things that we can do in our life in a mindful way actually completely changes the outcome of the thoughts that we're thinking. I like to think about distinctions between things like that are difficult things and suffering. It's a lot different when we look at life through the lens of suffering through it and experiencing things that are difficult. Because we have a tendency to say when things are difficult, I can do it, we can do this, or I learned so much, or whatever. When we sign up for the suffering, we lose. How about the distinction between intention and perfection? I once talked to a friend about the expectations of her child, and he had all these thoughts about how things should have been when he was young. And so he made judgments about his mother. And you know what? She knew in her mind that she tried, that she had good intentions. And so she was able to walk through that situation completely differently when she made that distinction. She was able to help him see how to give her grace. And then you might want to do that because your kids will need, to give you grace too. How about the distinction between worth and worthiness? So many times we think our worth is synonymous with our worthiness, right? We get confused and we think because we might not be worthy of something that we're not worth something. our worth never changes. Our worthiness for something might change depending on whatever it is that we're trying to achieve or to do, or, but we get that so confused with our worth. And when we get that confused, we think we can't do it. And that little voice of the evil one starts to penetrate, and our brain becomes a little liar. We're not really being fair to ourselves. I like to think about the distinction between worry and concern. The distinction is very, very different. When we sign up to worry, we're helpless. We have to stay up at night for no reason. Essentially, it's not helping us, right? Whereas concern is like, okay, what can I do in this situation? Yes, it's a lot. Yes, there's a lot going on. But in what way can I take action? Action, instead of just losing sleep, instead of just causing my cells to learn the pattern of worrying and continuing to repeat worry in my life. Our thoughts literally sculpt our brain. I love the quote by Dieter Uchtdorf that says, "It is your reaction to adversity, not the adversity itself, that determines how your life's story will develop." And how about this one by Einstein? He says, "Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving." I love the time that we are taking right now in this episode to be able to walk through your story, to be able to ask yourself, what truths are you buying into? What edit of the story are you signing up to retell, in your own mind? Not the one you tell when you meet someone, but when you walk away, when you're going to bed at night, when you wake up in the morning. What is the story that your cells are receiving? Because changing your story changes your life. And even if you look at your past and you're able just to think of it differently, kind of like that client and her son. Or, sometimes I've heard that my story and telling people how my parents reacted when I got pregnant or how things went. A lot of other girls had similar situations and they didn't have parents like mine, but somehow learning about my story helps them have freedom in their own story, simply because they can see that there's a different way. Maybe there's a different way that they could react as they go through their life, a different way that they could have been responded to, that there actually is access for more love. And somehow that unlocks chains that are holding the bricks in their hearts. Somehow. And our stories are so powerful when we're truly willing to share them and when we're really willing to take a look at the story that we're telling ourselves. I know that there is so much going on in the world. I know that there are probably either you're struggling or people in your life are struggling, maybe your kids, maybe, your siblings or whoever it might be. And I am so on the page for standing up and helping tell a story that's the best edit that they can hear for their story or that we can hear for our story. I fully and completely believe that the story that I was told as I was going through so much stuff during a really tender time altered and affected my reality, my future. And I fully and completely believe that the story you tell is the most important story. And I hope that in that you see that you have more power than you think you do. I hope you loved today's podcast. If there's someone in your life that needs a little bit of a lift, share it with them. Also, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review the podcast. I would love that. I wanted to take just a moment and say hello to Heather. Heather is one of our listeners, and she reached out to me. She sent me the most darling message on Instagram, and she just said that she had seen me in person at a place where she works. And she just said, I missed my chance to say hi to you. And I just wanted to say, if you see me anywhere and you don't personally know me, I love saying hi. I love it. So go ahead and reach out and say hello. I love talking with you. I love knowing that the podcast is benefiting your life. Heather said, she wanted to tell me how much she loved the podcast and how she loves the peaceful feelings that it brings her. Heather, you are a gem. Thank you so much for sharing with me how the podcast lands for you and some of your personal information that I treasure. I treasure that you trust me to help lift you in the times that you are going through. And that goes for all of you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your journey with you. I want to leave you with the idea and the thought that I know that sometimes being mindful and replacing your thoughts and getting into, the positive side of the story and stuff, I know that sometimes that's hard. And I want to remind you that you can also just find fun things to do and sort of distract yourself into feeling happiness. It's actually like a really wise technique, long enough for your cells to reprogram themselves, right? And then you suddenly have the answer into how you can tell yourself a different side of the story. I am completely cheering for you and really hope that this episode brings you power. Until next time, my friend.